Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host tonight, Matt Filipovich, joined by my phenomenal co-host, Mr. Bill DeFilippo. Bill, hello, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Matt. Next week is game week. No, this is the last week where we don't have a Penn State football game, right?
It feels very jarring to say that Penn State plays next week. It's week 0 this week. It's a pretty not that interesting slate, but I always kick off week 0 by going to get wings with a buddy of mine. So I'm very excited for that.
Nice.
And then the Thursday night slate next week has some decent games on it. So we're really close to actual interesting, compelling college football news that's not realignment based. So I'm very excited to be back at it. But Bill, tonight, first things first, I want to talk about something that happened to me this weekend because I always like to start the show with a nugget about what's going on in my life. Bill, I flew back from Jacksonville on Sunday, and it was an 11:30 in the morning flight. And I have never seen all of the Lord of the Rings. Have you seen these movies, Bill, or read the books?
I saw you. Do you mean the Peter Jackson trilogy, or do you mean that and The Hobbit and
the Peter Jackson trilogy, the original trilogy?
I saw those when I was 13 or 14. I remember them being good movies to whatever extent you're capable of critiquing art when you were 13 or 14 years old. But yeah, I remember them being very good.
So I've seen the first one, which name escapes me. I saw it maybe 8 months ago. So I watched The Two Towers on the plane, and this guy next to me had 3 Jack and Cokes on this morning flight and was watching my screen next to me and kept asking me what each creature that showed up on the screen was called. And it's broken my brain the last couple hours since I've been off that flight. It's I could never imagine being like that on a plane and interrupting some guy who's just trying to watch a 25-year-old fantasy movie and being so enthralled by what that creature is called. So that's what happened with me this weekend, Bill.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, Bill. We're going to talk today about what I think is maybe the most... How do I even want to word this? The Penn State defense is what we're talking about. You know, from clicking on the episode. First of all, thank you for listening. We're excited to be here to talk Penn State defense. Bill, this unit, I think, was frankly last year's unit was the best Penn State defense I have seen in my lifetime. I think the numbers back it up. You go back and you look at those numbers, and I apologize to our YouTube viewers for looking away, but last year, they led the nation with 49 sacks and 111 total tackles for loss. They had the nation's best run defense, allowing 75.5 rushing yards per game. They had the nation's 7th best passing defense, allowing about 171 yards per game, 2nd nationally in total defense, 3rd nationally in scoring defense, allowing 13.4 points per game. So fewer than 2 touchdowns a game. Bill, this defense last year was so unbelievable. I truly do not know how we can get on this podcast and ask for really anything better than what we saw last year. Do you think it's even possible?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I certainly think it's possible. I mean, I won't sit here and say that, I necessarily expect it or I think it's going to happen or anything like that. But going into this, coming out of last season, Penn State was 4th nationally in defensive SP plus, had a rating of 10.5. Going into this season, Bill Connolly has his updated numbers, and I'm trying to find the most recent ones right now, but they are slight. Here we go. Coming into this season, 4th nationally at 9.7, rating 9.7. So a slight uptick in, kind of that what SP plus point per game metric, still viewed as one of the top 3 to 5 defenses in America. And when I think of why this defense can be better, you go unit by unit on this Penn State team. I think defensive tackle is going to be an upgrade. I think
Big time.
defensive end probably won't be an upgrade, but I don't think it's going to be like a huge downgrade because I really do believe in Abdul Carter playing that position. I really do believe in Dennis-Sutton playing in that position. We'll bring Dani up in a little bit. He did something fun the other day. Linebacker is where I'm a little bit queasy, but cornerback, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to our pal Ryan Donnelly of Meet at Midfield, but Ryan went his high school football coach was Terry Smith, and he said Terry's not one to just say things. And he said this Penn State cornerback room is the deepest that he's ever had. And I think kind of relative to expectations, a lot of this had to do with the fact that Kalen King didn't have a particularly stellar season. There's a chance for this cornerback room to be better. And I think the safety room is going to be better because it's bringing all the same guys back. So I think when you look just on the surface, Matt, I think with you, it's a lot of like wrapping your head around how a defense can be better, looking at what last year's defense accomplished, looking at how good of a defense coordinator Manny Diaz was. It's going to be very difficult, don't get me wrong, but when you're just going off of the Jimmies and Joes, like, yeah, I think it is possible. I won't say likely, I won't say probable. I think they have a chance to be as good, if not maybe a tiny bit better than what Penn State's defense was last year.
And I guess kind of saying that there's even that chance for it to match as good as last year's defense was kind of says, really all we need to say about what we think about this unit. Bill, one thing I want to hit on that when I was doing some research ahead of this podcast, trying to think about where improvement could come from for that Penn State defense for me. And you look at the red zone numbers. Bill, do you remember like very many offensive drive against the Penn State defense that like ended in the red zone? Like you think about the few times they did really allow points, like it was like deep passes a lot of the time, or like that Northwestern game where Singleton fumbles the opening kickoff and they spot him 3 points like inside the 15. But like I really don't remember too many scoring drives that like stalled out in the red zone for a lot of teams. And you look at the numbers, the Penn State defense allowed points on 92% of their red zone opportunities, one of the worst in college football. And if you would have told me that last year, I would have been stunned by that. So I guess if there's one place this unit can take a step forward, like it's probably got to be red zone defense.
I think that's reasonable, but I also think a very important thing to stress in that, Matt, Penn State allowed the fewest red zone attempts in the country. Opposing teams got into the red zone 24. You said they scored 22 times. Penn State allowed 24 attempts into the red zone. That was the fewest in college football. The 22 scores they allowed were the third fewest in college football behind Ohio State and Michigan. The 13 touchdowns they allowed tied for the second fewest behind Michigan with 11, and then Ohio State and Kansas State with 13. And then the field goals, that was a little bit different. Penn State allowed a bunch of field goals in the red zone, but opposing teams, once they got into the red zone, I don't have what percentage of those drives ended in field goals compared to touchdowns, but 9 of the 24 trips ended in field goals, which was a middle of the road number nationally. So the thing was, a lot teams didn't get into the red zone a lot against Penn State. When they did, they usually scored, but it happened so infrequently. And this is absolutely a thing worth dog-earing as we talk about this year's team and how they can get better and where some potential weaknesses and all are. It happened so infrequently the team scored and they got down there. That is an area where you kind of look at it and go, it's just going to be so hard to limit opposing teams to essentially 2 trips into the red zone, 24 attempts in 13 games, essentially 2 trips into the red zone a game. That might go up, like all these sorts of things. But I do think it is worth mentioning that like part of, that number, that percentage is a little bit high. That also never happened, never gotten to that point against last year's defense. And then, like you mentioned, you have situations like, Indiana's couple of long touchdowns against Penn State, a few things like that.
Yeah. So, Bill, we'll close the book on last year's defense by just answering this one question. a lot of guys are off to the NFL after this one. Adisa Isaac with the Ravens, Chops with the Dolphins. Curtis Jacob has been getting some really good reviews with the Chiefs. You lost Johnny Dixon, Keaton Ellis, who's still with the Titans, Daquan Hardy with the Bills, Kalen King with the Packers, obviously. Bill, who's the guy who was on the Penn State defense last year, who's no longer on the roster, that you think is going to be hardest to replace? And I can go first if you want.
Yeah, you go. We might have different answers on this, so you go first.
I'm going to say it's Daquan Hardy. And that's not to take a shot at the current cornerback room, but I think Daquan Hardy's ability to play inside, play outside, his real underdog mentality, his willingness to come up and be a tackler in the run game. I'm not saying that's not going to exist with, Cam Miller, AJ Harris, Jalen Kimber, Davian Collins, Elliott Washington, like all of those guys, I'm sure are going to be phenomenal players in their own right. But I think Daquan Hardy may have been Penn State's best corner last year. Like, that doesn't feel controversial to say with the impact he was simply able to make defensively. Let's even take out his special teams impact. But I think it's going to be really hard to replace a guy like Daquan Hardy, especially as Tom Allen goes to more of a 4-2-5 defense. I just really think replacing the fifth-year senior who played his best ball his final year, who was such I'll call him a bright spot of that Peach Bowl, which was, tough for the secondary as a whole. But Daquan Hardy went out there and he battled his ass off against some NFL, receivers. So I got to give the guy credit for that. I think it's going to be pretty tough to replace Hardy. But even with that being said, I still feel like that, cornerback room can find a way to rebuild him in the aggregate.
So I will actually disagree pretty strongly with that.
Okay.
I think the fact that they're moving to a more 4-2-5 and they're kind of getting rid of a slot cornerback and they're replacing that with more of a hybrid role that a safety, big linebacker, that
like what Marcus Allen played here, essentially, is kind of how I view that new Lion role.
Well, the thing is, Marcus Allen was even like a deep safety. This is going to be a guy who's a little bit higher up on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And if that is true, if it is a guy like Jalen Reed, 6'9", not 6'9". Wow. 6 feet tall, 209 pounds. You look at during Tom Allen's time at Indiana, one of the guys who played kind of that bigger slot position was, a guy who was really good at that was Marcelino McCrary-Bell, who was 6'4", 214 pounds. Daquan Hardy, for how great of a football player he was, 5'9", 179. This mostly comes down to the fact that, I just don't think that's really going to be a position on this Penn State defense, even though I love Daquan Hardy, as you know. The guy I am going to go with is Curtis Jacobs.
Yep.
And I mostly view this as, when I look at this Penn State defense, where do I see the weakness, a potential weakness? And I'm a big fan of Tony Rojas. I think Dom DeLuca is going to do some really good things. A guy like Tamir Robinson is going to be a good football player for Penn State. But I do think linebacker is, to whatever extent I have a position of concern on this Penn State defense, it would be linebacker. And, you kind of go through those names. Am I super worried about replacing Adisa Isaac or Chop Robinson? No, because I think Abdul Carter and Dennis-Sutton are freaks of nature. Amin Vanover's a really good player. Zariah Fisher has been around forever. They have guys there when he gets healthy. Yes. Mm-hmm. Cornerback, Kalen King, bit of a down year last year. Johnny Dixon was a good player, but I think they have a ton of talent and depth in that room, so I'm not too concerned. I look at linebacker. I look at how big of a question mark it is. Kobe King's a good football player. Tony Rojas, a really young guy, but a really promising guy. Dom DeLuca, a guy who has, worked really hard to get better and better, going from a run-on to where he is now. But it's a couple of guys who still need to prove themselves a bit, and still need to prove that they could do it over the course of a 13-game season. They don't have to prove that they could be good football players because they have shown that. It's, can you do it over the course of an entire season? And we knew Curtis Jacobs was a guy to do that. So he's the guy, I go right to Curtis Jacobs as, if I could go back in time and get one guy from last year's team and say, hey, we're going to need you on next year's team. I can't even remember if Curtis Jacobs had enough eligibility.
He would have his COVID.
But if they could have, he would have had his COVID year. Mm-hmm. I would have picked Curtis Jacobs in a nanosecond.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And the existence of the line position is a bit of a like mystery for me right now, just to see what
For
it's
sure.
going to look like. Because you mentioned, who was the Indiana player who played it? Like his measurements at that 6'4", like that feels more Marcus Allen to me than like what Jalen Reed is going to be able to play at. And that's not to say Jalen Reed like can't lay the wood when push comes to shove. I think he's the best tackling safety in that room. I think he's a wildly underrated player and has been for some time. So I'm excited to see as that secondary evolves. Bill, what else from the Tom Allen defense are you excited to see? Like, what are specific changes, or what has the Tom Allen defense that we've been able to watch, being in the same division as them for a long time over the years been? For me, it's the importance of the middle linebacker position for Tom Allen. Like, I think it's a very, very good thing when your middle linebacker is your leading tackler. What that tells me is a lot of plays are remaining in front of your front seven. That means you're limiting big plays. That means your safeties and your corners, who, while they could be good tacklers, shouldn't be as good tacklers as your linebacking unit. So when I look at a guy like Kobe King, a guy who I think can be a 100 tackler player on this defense. Indiana's leading tackler last year at over 100 tackles, and it was a linebacker. I'm very excited to see that shift from, hey, everybody kind of eats here, to where there's a clear lead dog who is going to go out there and is going to kind of clean up everybody's messes if they get past what I think is going to be one of the better defensive fronts in college football.
I think that's reasonable. If I am going to pick anything when it comes to a Tom Allen defense and what makes me so interested, this was Nick Caduti of For the Blog. He pointed this out. It was that Manny Diaz wanted to confuse teams at the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
Manny Diaz, and I think Thomas Frank Carr at BWI had something similar to that. I didn't get a chance to watch that one. I only saw a clip or two. But Manny Diaz wanted his defense to confuse you up front.
Mm-hmm.
Tom Allen isn't necessarily going to be a guy who does that. He's not a guy who, Manny liked to have his guys up on the line of scrimmage and make a quarterback and an offensive line go, where's the pressure going to be coming from? What are they going to be doing here? How are we going to react to it? All these sorts of things. Tom Allen is a little bit more conventional in that way. Where he's good at confusing you is on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
He's really good at making you think one thing, making a quarterback think one thing before the snap, and then doing something else. A quote that I wanted to point out was, a few from in the 2020 game that Indiana played against Ohio State. Ohio State, that was a pretty famous football game. That was when, after Indiana beat Penn State, went to Columbus, Ohio State won that game 42-35. Ohio State put up a ton of yards. They put up something like 600 yards in that game, but there were 4 turnovers. And Justin Fields, after the game, talked about how he didn't play especially well, how was making the wrong reads. Ryan Day, there was something about wanting to get it back. There were just things that didn't go well because that Indiana defense was flying around. And the quote that I wanted to say after the game, this is from Ryan Day. Overall, I thought Justin Fields played really gutsy, made some big time throws. They were blitzing. We knew they were going to. They were blitzing every snap. I mean, literally every snap. So there was going to be negative plays. There was going to be big plays. That's kind of how it played out. Fields certainly want to have those plays and interceptions back. Had to be aggressive. You can't be on your heels when you play against a defense like this. And that last little bit is what excites me. You can't be on your heels when you play against a defense like this. That sounds like a Tom Allen defense, and that sounds like what Manny Diaz's defense wanted to do. So if they are going to be able to confuse the opposing quarterback by just throwing stuff at him that confuses him, if you're going to be able to put the opposing team, the opposing offense on the back foot, I think this Penn State defense has the talent, has the dudes, and has a lot of experience in doing just that, that if you're kind of making little tweaks to the system, that's going to pay dividends over the course of 12, 16, whatever it is, football game season.
And I didn't realize how much Tom Allen really does with the back seven to really confuse folks.
Mhm.
And with that, I think especially the safety room being the perceived strength of this defense, I think that KJ Winston, um, Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley especially can have a lot of fun playing really loose and really free. Because again,
Mhm.
you have those corners in front of you that you trust can get the job done in one-on-one coverage, which gives a guy like Zakee Wheatley especially the ability to have free reign and cover sideline to sideline with his 6'3" frame. So really, really interesting to see where this Penn State defense goes. But Bill, I'm more interested to see if there's a certain place you go for your collegiate apparel. Bill, is there a certain place you had in mind?
Yes, it's the place that I am currently wearing right now. I am wearing my Penn State wrestling T-shirt from Home Field Apparel.
Home Field Apparel is our podcast sponsor, as they have been for each of the last 3 seasons. They make some of the coolest collegiate apparel in the marketplace today. They have a ton of schools, and they are always adding more. I think today they added South Dakota State University. So as the FCS season gets ready to kick off, they are always adding more schools. They have t-shirts, crew necks, sweatshirts, hats, bomber jackets. They have the new, what are the boxes called, Bill? Are they kickoff boxes, essentially?
Yeah,
Kickoff
yeah.
boxes? And with that, you get koozies, you get a set of socks, you get a couple of t-shirts that are exclusive to those boxes. And for our listeners, you can get 15% off your first order with promo code RLR24. I am rocking my We Are Old School Lion shirt as we speak for our YouTube viewers. And Bill, I made plans for how I'm going to watch the West Virginia game. I'm going back to the basement bar that the Alumni Association has a deal with. And I am very excited to rock my home field apparel out there for the first game of the year. And you can do so too. So again, it's 15% off your first order with promo code RLR24 at checkout. Thank you to Home Field, as always, for sponsoring this podcast. And Bill, this current unit, a lot back. We'll go position by position. And I put in our notes, I just put D-line in one bullet point. But
For sure.
I really want to talk about this group separately as both D tackles and defensive ends. Who do you want to talk about first?
Let's talk about the defensive tackles, because I think that'll be a little bit quicker.
Mhm.
And it was a thing that we talked about after Michigan won the national title, Matt. There were a couple of things that really helped them. One, obviously, was a widespread cheating scandal that hopefully the NCAA brings the hammer down on them for. But the bigger thing was that they had grown men playing everywhere. They had 22 and 23-year-olds going up against 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And you look at Penn State's defensive tackle room, and they have the kind of grown men in the middle of their defense that you can then build everything else around and make it so your defense is able to do some really special things because you have those rocks in the center of things.
And when you say grown men, Bill, like you truly mean it. Of the top 5 guys, like I think top 5 are going to be Devon J. Thomas, Zane Durant, Hakeem Beamon, Keziah Izzard, and Alonzo Ford. 2 of those guys are in their 6th year. 2 of those guys are in their 5th year. And then the other one, I think, is the most naturally talented of the bunch in Zane Durant. That is a phenomenal place to kick things off for your defense. I think this is a unit that can be unbelievably disruptive in a way that I think a lot of us were clamoring for after the Michigan game back in 2022. Like, I think they've done a complete 180 in about like a 19-month span, which is a very impressive feat for Deion Barnes and company. Like, Deion Barnes has quickly put, to rest any concerns I had about a really young guy being a position coach at a job like Penn State. He has done an unbelievable job cultivating depth and creating a culture that makes guys want to stay for their 6th and 5th seasons when there's no guarantee of starting for a lot of those guys. Like, that tells me that that unit is unbelievably competitive and that they're going to be able to trot out fresh legs like basically every drive if they really want to.
Yeah, and it gives them a lot of flexibility in the event that, let's say a game is going well for Penn State, but isn't completely out of hand yet. It's not like, when they play Maryland and they're up 48-0 with a minute left in the first quarter or anything. You are in a situation where you can afford to then give a younger dude that you feel good about, a Caleb Artis, a Ty Blanding, a Liam Andrews, DeAndre Cook, T.A. Cunningham, if you think they can physically hold up and that reps would be good for them, you could say, okay, we're going to throw you out there with Zane and let you get some relatively high intensity reps. And then if anything goes wrong, you could then say, all right, Hakeem, go back in there. Keziah, go back in there. Alonzo Ford, a guy who has been starting to get some really nice reviews out of camp, you go back in there. There are just so many different things that you could do with this part of your defense where you can't necessarily block those dudes one-on-one.
No.
If you want to block those dudes one-on-one, you have to worry about, okay, who's going to be blitzing from the linebacker or the secondary? Are we going to be putting Abdul Carter and Dennis-Sutton in one-on-ones? If we're going to overcompensate for them, are we then going to be putting one of these big grown men at defensive tackle into a one-on-one? Or are we going to just be in max protect and say, we need to stop this defensive line and we're going to have to trust our receivers to get it? It's so interesting and so fun what you can do when you have this much talent at that specific position. And it seems like Penn State, they're going to lean on this group on the field and off. And, you asked Franklin about Devon J. Thomas, and it sounds like he's talking about one of his favorite people to ever live. There's just so much good in this position on the football field at the very top. And from a depth perspective, that it's hard not to be excited both in what they're going to do and what the rest of the defense is going to do because of them.
And you mentioned that last point, Bill. I'll touch on just really quickly. If they're going to go heavy 4-2-5, you're sacrificing size anytime you take a linebacker on the field. I don't care how, sure of a tackler Jalen Reed is. Curtis Jacobs is a bigger version of that, and I wish he was still around. So for you to go out there and have these grown men in front of that linebacker group, in front of those safeties, I think is really going to allow Tom Allen to call the defense the way he would absolutely imagine if he could. So really excited for that group. But Bill, these edge rushers, despite losing, Chop Robinson, one of the best get-offs I think I've ever seen out of a defensive end, Adisa Isaac, Steady Eddie, great guy to have in the program for a long time. Zariah Fisher, it sounds like he's out for a while. We won't call it out for the year because, you never know. But overall, I think this might be a hot take, Bill, and I don't mean for it to be, and check me if I'm wrong. I think the ceiling of this current defensive end group might be higher than what they had last year.
I don't know. I can see them having I could see them being a better group. I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility. I think that when you have a guy like Abdul Carter, who is viewed as a high level NFL first round pick before he takes a single snap at the position,
he was named
and a guy like
second team All-American as an edge rusher earlier today by the AP,
despite never being an edge rusher before. Yes, and then deny Dennis-Sutton, a 5-star in his third year, a guy who. I almost feel like if not for the fact that Abdul Carter moving there adds so much novelty, there would be more hope maybe Dani Dennis-Sutton could be in line for a breakout year. But yeah, you just look at those two. You look at how they have a little bit of depth at the position in Amin Vanover, Zariah Fisher when he gets healthy, Smith Vilbert.
Vanover, I think, is wildly underrated, man. That dude is you have to see how he holds up in this bigger role. But everything we've seen out of him for years has been, you put him in there, splash plays seem to constantly be generated. Again, you have to see it spread out over more snaps, but I'm really excited for that dude in his 5th year.
Yeah, and I've never seen or heard anything like what is happening right now with Max Granville. I mean, all the reports out of camp are that he has some really special tools to work with, which is insane considering that he enrolled at Penn State 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, for reference, Granville was supposed to be getting ready for his senior season of high school. He is a bit older. I do know he is 18 already, so he would have been an older high school player, but still to show up to campus when we're expecting to go to fall camp or your high school fall camp back in July and have the kind of reports he's getting tells me that that guy might be built a little bit different.
And it's kind of kind of like what we mentioned with the defensive tackle room. Obviously, a little bit different because they need Abdul Carter and Dani Dennis-Sutton to get reps at the position, but they can afford to give some of the younger dudes that they have in this room opportunities because they have so much talent. They could pair them with three of the really veteran dudes along this defensive line. They could, mix and match and play with this in a way that I find really fun and really interesting. And, they're going to, a lot of the optimism around Penn State has to do with the fact that this entire defensive line can be really good. And again, I don't know if I think that the ceiling is higher than it was last year because it was really high, but it has the potential to be really, really good.
Where are you on the Smith-Vilbert hype train? I'm really intrigued by this guy. Like, I'm truly rooting for this guy, maybe harder than I'm going to be rooting for anybody else in the Penn State defense. Like, sixth-year guy has missed 2 seasons. Like, he's really transformed his body. Like, he's 6'6", 292 at the last roster update. I really want to see what he looks like in that Chop Robinson role where it's an obvious passing down. And again, I hope they keep this from the Manny defense and they pull a tackle off the field and they just put hopefully Smith-Vilbert, to rush inside because he's big enough to hold up and let him rush the passer. Bill, where are you on the Smith-Vilbert hype train? Like, do you think he is legitimately a guy that can turn into a Sunday player like some people think he is?
I don't necessarily want to put that on him just because it's been such a unique situation with him where he hasn't played in so long. But he's one of those guys that, I basically said this for the entire offense. Ask me again after the West Virginia game. Yeah. Ask me again on Smith-Vilbert after the West Virginia game because I want to see what he's capable of doing.
Bill, the linebacker room. I love the top 2 guys. I think they're great. I'm a huge Kobe King fan. I think Tony Rojas is going to get all Big Ten honors in his first year as a starter. I feel that good about the kid. Outside of that, and we'll treat this, Bill, like there's only going to be 2 starting linebackers. I think that's probably fair with how much 4-2-5 we're really talking about. Outside of that, Bill, I'm nervous. Like, you lose Keon Wiley for a while with injury. Kavion Keys is off the roster. They moved Dakari Nelson, a really big safety, up to linebacker, which I think is a great move, both for Dakari Nelson and both for the depth of the linebacker room. I think Tyler Elsdon and Dom DeLuca are going to get a lot of run, but I feel like we pretty much know what they are. Again, I have no worries about the top 2, and I think DeLuca can make some plays when he gets his chance. But if an injury piles up, Bill, I'm nervous about what this room looks like very quickly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that that's when you start wondering, like, do they have to move Abdul Carter back to linebacker in order to kind of deal with the fact that that Tony Rojas messed his ankle up. He's going to be out for 3 weeks in one of the games.
To be clear, Bill, that's an unbelievable security blanket. Like that's an unbelievable.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. But I think that in these first couple of weeks, when you try to identify players who are going to be really important for Penn State, Tamir Robinson, or under the radar important, Tamir Robinson is one of those guys. If he's able to step in and be a steady Eddie at linebacker, if he's able to be a guy that you could rely on to play in the Big Ten, that is huge for Penn State. Obviously, and that comes with something, said it a little bit earlier, where DeLuca and Rojas both have to show that they could do it over the course of an entire season. Like, I'm confident that they can. But, I can be as confident in the world as in as many things as I want. You still have to go out and do it. But watching a guy like Tamir Robinson, watching a guy like Tyler Elsdon and seeing he was a guy who a little bit too frequently just kind of gets, has his physical limitations that he struggles to get past. If he could just have a level of competence about him within those physical limitations, and if Tamir Robinson can show in the opening couple of weeks that he is able to play Big Ten he could be a Big Ten football player early on, and you don't suddenly have to worry about like, oh God, do we have to go to one of the true freshmen? Does Tyrese Mills need to get on the field? Does Dakari Nelson got to get on the field? Do we have to like search for an answer? I think this linebacker room will be fine, but navigating these first couple of weeks is going to be a really big challenge. Even, with the, with accepting that it's at West Virginia, which is going to be a tough game. Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, and a not great UCLA team at home,
and the bye week in there too.
and the bye week in there. They're going to have to navigate all this, and it's going to be a big challenge for Tom Allen. It's going to be a big challenge just for this linebacker room in general.
I would no disrespect to those two MAC teams, but I would not mind like not seeing very much of Kobe or very much of Tony Rojas in those games at all. Like I would really think those could be great opportunities to cultivate that depth with a ton of Tamir Robinson, with a ton of Dom DeLuca, and just see where it goes from there. Like if Anthony Specca, if Kari Jackson, like if those guys can give you anything, like I think they're all headed for red shirts, but in case they're not, that feels like a great opportunity to use 2 of their 4 games. So curious where that ends up. Bill, would you want to go safeties or corners next?
Again, we'll do safeties just because I think that's going to be a pretty quick conversation. This room is going to be unbelievable. Like this might be the strength of the entire roster, and KJ Winston, Zaki Wheatley, Jalen Reed, they might all be NFL players.
Can I ask you one question on that note, actually, Bill? That's a good transition.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're not going to like this question at all. Is KJ Winston the first Penn State defensive back to be taken in the first round?
I will say no, just because it's rare that safeties go in the first round.
Okay.
Cornerbacks tend to,
unless you're the Lions and you build your football team by vibes more than anything else, which is a smart way to build your football team.
Yeah, I'm looking at last year's NFL draft. I don't believe a safety went in the first round. No safeties went in the first round in last year's NFL draft.
Brian Branch,
the NFL draft before that, Brian Branch was he might have I think he was he was a second round pick. The year before that, 2022, Kyle Hamilton went with the number 14 overall pick. Then at the very end, definitely. And then at the very end of the first round, Dax Hill and Lewis Cine both went in.
That's right.
The first round. 2021, there were no safeties picked in the first round. 2020, there were, no safeties drafted in the first round. So I'll just play the odds and say no.
Totally fair. Bill, broadly speaking, though, this safety room, I think, can be the best in college football. And shout out to Dex for making that happen. Like Jalen Reed, I said it earlier in this podcast, I think he's one of the most underrated defenders in the Big Ten. Like I don't think got any all Big Ten mentions last year. Like not even honorable mention, which I think is wildly disrespectful to his play last year. KJ Winston kind of usurped Keaton Ellis towards the latter half of last year, maybe even from the jump, if you really think about it. Zaki Wheatley, a guy who showed a lot of flashes as a redshirt freshman, took a bit of a step back last year, and from all the reports out of camp, seems to be a guy who has this renewed focus and I think has the best ball skills of anybody on this roster. So right there, that very top well 3. Might. Sorry?
Very well might.
Yeah, very well might. So I just think that team can really, or that unit can really take this defense to a level we haven't seen in a while. The depth behind them, a bit concerning. Lamont Payne, a Pittsburgh kid, moved from corner back there now. Is it Dejon Lane? Seems to be getting some pretty good reviews out of camp. But, it tells me a lot about what they think about this depth, that despite the fact that they lost King Mack, who I thought was going to be a starter here as early as next season, and I don't feel like it's going to hurt him that much in 2024.
Yeah, and I believe the reports out of camp, I believe our friends over at Onward State mentioned that Zion Tracy is a guy who could potentially slide into that slot nickel back type of role, which could then let Jalen Reed play more at safety. But you look at the depth in this room, especially after Dakari Nelson got moved to linebacker, and like you mentioned, King Mack transferring. Yeah, there's a little bit of concern about what happens if someone rolls an ankle or something. But I also think that we've gotten to a point where Anthony Poindexter has earned the benefit of the doubt. Terry Smith is the king of this. I will just never question anything Terry Smith does. We're getting to that point with Anthony Poindexter and his ability to get his guys ready to play. So whether that is a guy like Lamont Payne, one of the true freshmen, whomever it might end up being, I just have faith that they'd be able to figure out the worst case scenario, which it's the worst case scenario. It's supposed to suck no matter what. But the best case scenario is this is the best safety room, one of, if not the best safety room in college football.
The cornerbacks, Bill, I have my starters
Yeah,
projected. I'm saying Cam Miller and AJ Harris. I think Cam Miller
agreed.
got a kind of a bad rap for what happened in the Peach Bowl. Like, listen, was it great? No. Was the Penn State defense, playing with every tool at its availability? No. Like, I think Cam Miller's better than that performance. AJ Harris, former 5-star, got on the field at Georgia with Kirby Smart, like a defensive guy as his head coach, like thinking he was ready. I think those two, flanked by Jalen Kimber, a guy with a ton of SEC experience, Elliott Washington, a guy who, burned redshirt as a true freshman, and Aldavian Collins, a guy who seemed to be like the buzziest name all summer long for most improved player in the program. I think no matter what happens here, there's a floor that's been established, and I'm curious to see if the ceiling can be elevated by what is currently in that room at that top 5.
For sure. I mean, I think that one thing Penn State did not necessarily have last year was, we go back to the Ohio State game and we go back to Kalen King battled against Marvin Harrison Jr. And he just kept getting burned over and over again, because that's what happens when you go against Marvin Harrison Jr. They have a guy in AJ Harris who, if it all clicks for him, is the kind of guy that you can put up against a Marvin Harrison Jr. and he's going to win some reps. And I think that is something that they just didn't have last year, was a guy who can go up against the other team's best wide receiver and he's going to get his.
Mm-hmm.
And I think AJ Harris is that kind of guy. You mentioned Cam Miller. He was put into an impossible situation against a wide receiver who's going to be in the NFL next year in Trey Harris. And he got cooked, but he fought. He kept getting up. He kept battling. And that says a lot to me for a guy who the most football he ever played was against a Lane Kiffin team, which is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
You mentioned Jalen Kimber, a guy who's played a lot of football at Georgia and Florida, is now going to be up at Penn State. Aldavian Collins, like you mentioned, a guy who got a ton of buzz all offseason, some really talented youngsters led by Elliott Washington. And, something I just said about Anthony Poindexter, but like Terry Smith is the king of, I'm not going to worry about things as long as Terry Smith is Penn State's cornerbacks coach, because he gets his guys ready to play every single week. And for the most part, they perform to an all Big Ten caliber level every single week. So I'm excited to see what this cornerback room has in store, man. They're going to be very good, because this is just the standard that Penn State's cornerback room has set.
One thing as you were rattling off some names, Bill, it got me thinking. Think about where these Penn State corners are from now. Like, they're from parts of the country that have always produced, frankly, superior secondary players than like what's in Penn State's traditional footprint. Cam Miller's from Northern Florida. Kimber Harris is from Texas. I want to say Kimber is from Georgia, or he might be from Florida, that part of the country. Aldavian Collins from the South. Elliott Washington from the South. Like, Terry Smith has found a way to fill what has like long been the lone black mark on the Penn State defense, at least like, we're talking 15 years ago, maybe that was always the weak point, to now being one of the biggest strengths of the Penn State roster. So humongous credit to Terry for that. Bill, you can go anywhere on the defense with this last question before we kind of shift gears a little bit. Who is the one guy on this Penn State defense, not a starter, that you think people aren't talking enough about? When he's on the field, you're going to be like, ooh, that dude's coming in, something fun's about to happen.
Well, he is a starter, and it's Dennis-Sutton.
Okay, love this.
He's a guy that I don't think people are talking nearly enough about. And here's the thing that he did that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. March 8th, 2022, he tweets, "I will be the best defensive end in CFB," and he pins it to his Twitter account. And it's just been there ever since he got on campus. And 2 days ago, on August 17th, he quote tweeted it and just said, "standing on it." That is the mentality I want out of a guy who's going to get after passers.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, again, with how much excitement there is around Abdul Carter's move to defensive end, there hasn't been nearly enough talk and excitement around the fact that this is a year that is setting up for Dennis-Sutton, who as a freshman had 16 tackles, 3 sacks, and an interception. as a
Forgot about
sophomore,
that
had
pick.
23.
That was awesome.
Yeah, 23 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. Like, he's a guy who has been building towards a breakout year. And again, with Abdul Carter's move to defensive end, I just don't think we've gotten to a point where people have gone, oh, wait, Dennis-Sutton has the potential to be as good as anyone else who plays this position in college football. So I'm really, really excited about what we're going to get out of him.
I'm going to stick in that same position room, and I kind of hit on him earlier, and it's Amin Vanover. Again, that's a guy who per capita, like, really made splash play after splash play. And listen, I know it's going to be tough to, want to move Abdul Carter or Dennis-Sutton off the field. But if, like, the time comes where it's like, hey, we want to confuse this quarterback a little bit, you're throwing Abdul on the field, you bring Amin on the field, you drop Abdul in coverage, which he's done as a linebacker and has a pick to his name, and then you get Amin Vanover in there, and he's able to give you a little bit of a different skill set than Abdul was able to. And I think he's a guy who can, again, be one of the more disruptive players in the Big Ten. So that's a guy I'm really excited to watch as the season ramps up. And Bill, with the season, a time of recording 12 days away, again, I cannot believe how close we are. We hit on our offensive expectations as a whole. Bill, what are your overall expectations for Tom Allen's unit in his first year in Happy Valley?
So I'm going to mention I'm going to mention something that happened back in 2020, and that was the numbers for Indiana's defense, which was the best defense that they had at Indiana under Tom Allen. Had a number of guys who made it to the NFL in one way or another. Micah McFadden was an NFL player, Cam Jones, Aaron Casey, Reese Taylor, I think Jalen Williams, Jamar Johnson, Marcelino Ball, Brian Fitzgerald, Tywan Mullen, guys who made it to the NFL. Didn't necessarily, not all necessarily all pros or anything like that, but guys who have made it to the league.
Guys who are getting pensions from the NFL, which from Indiana is a hell of a place to end up.
Exactly. That team was 32nd in defensive SP+, 43rd in yards per play, 20th in scoring defense. They had 25 sacks in 8 games, which is 3.13 a game, which is 14th nationally. 17 picks in 8 games, which was 2.13 interceptions a game, which was the most in college football. And it's a point that people have said a lot about Tom Allen. It's a point people said a lot about Andy Kotelnicki, but he was doing that with players that weren't super highly regarded recruits, were guys who were good football players, turned into really good football players, got developed into really good football players, got really comfortable within his system, and showed that they are better than their star rating, better than, all these sorts of things. And we're able to get to the NFL. You look at this Penn State defense, and it's a lot of guys who were very highly regarded recruits, have shown that they could get it done on a college football field and can be NFL caliber players. And when you see what Tom Allen was able to get out of that Indiana team, it wasn't as good with other Indiana teams.
No.
And this is something I think needs to be mentioned. You go through all of his defenses. 2017, they were 25th in defensive SP+. Couldn't find the number for 2018. 2019, 43rd. 2021, 73rd. 2022, 109th. 2023, 73rd. You look at their yards per play numbers, their scoring defense numbers, not as good. But when he had his best talent, he had his best defense. And I expect him to have his best defense yet. Now, if Penn State has the 32nd best defense in the country by defensive SP+, that's a catastrophe. But I think this should be a top 10 unit, a unit that gets after quarterbacks, that leans on where it has talent, where it has veterans, gets to the quarterback, forces interception, does the stuff that we expect out of a Penn State defense. I think it was Jalen Reed had some quote where he basically said, like, it's very similar to what Manny Diaz wanted us to do. And if the defensive players are still comfortable, they still have a good sense of what they have to do, and they could perform within that framework, and Tom Allen is able to build up relationships with players and understand how to best use them by the time the first game rolls around, I see no reason to think this won't be a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit in the country again.
I think the floor is like 7th like the number 7 defense in the country. I think that's the floor. I feel good about that. I feel like that's really high, but I really like what this unit has. One thing.
Can I mention one other?
Yeah, hit me. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, when you're done, I'll get out.
Bill, they had 24 turnovers last year. Do you know the interception to fumble recovery breakdown off the top of your head?
No, I do.
Because I know it. It's 12 and 12. That's wild.
Okay.
That you got 24 turnovers and it was evenly split amongst interceptions and fumble recoveries. That tells me that's not turnover luck. That tells me you're making plays. Like, it'd be one thing if it's like, oh my God, they recovered, 19 fumbles or whatever. I think that this unit, just by being coached by Manny for as long as it was, has a certain level of see ball, get ball that is going to maintain itself through Tom Allen's defense. I think they're going to be aggressive. I think they're going to be able to play very freely. And I think with the 2 edge rushers leading the charge and a group of grown-ass men in the middle of that defense, I think this unit can be equally as disruptive. Do I think they're going to allow more yards and more points? Yes. But I think that they're going to be better set up for success by a Penn State offense that I don't think is going to leave them hung out to dry all that often anymore. So overall, I think this unit can be top 7 good. And I'm anxious to see how they handle Garrett Green, a quarterback who I think is going to be one of the more dynamic signal callers they're going to play all season long.
That's fair. And you hit on the thing that I wanted to mention there, Matt, which is that Penn State is going to be, it's not going to be as dominant, I would say, or it shouldn't be as dominant on defense this year, for the simple reason that they are trading out some absolutely ghastly opposing defenses, or opposing offenses, rather, with units that are a little bit more competent on that side of the ball. And I'm going through the list of some of the teams that Penn State played in conference play last year and where they were in offensive SP plus. Northwestern was 112th, Indiana was 105th, Michigan State was 122nd, Rutgers was 97th, Iowa, I don't have, I'm trying to find their number right here because I know they were, I know it was really funny and I want to make fun of Iowa. 129th, like
out of like 133 teams.
Yes. Like, there were some truly abhorrent opposing offenses in conference play on their schedule last year. Did I look up Illinois? No, I didn't look up Illinois. Hold on.
I'm going to say Illinois was like 112th. That's my pick for Illinois.
92nd.
That was close.
92nd. So there were 5 opposing offenses Penn State played last year. And then obviously there was Ohio State and Michigan who were going to be a leg up. But you look through the offenses Penn State's going to play this year. Ohio State 25th in offensive SP plus heading into the season. USC is 5th. West Virginia is 23rd. And then Washington is 26th, but that comes with a really big asterisk on it. And then you look at kind of the quote unquote bad teams Penn State is going to be playing. You can lump Washington in there if you want. Wisconsin 77th, Purdue 70th, Minnesota 89th, Maryland 82nd. Sounds pretty bad, and it is pretty bad, but that is also a step up on some of those really abhorrent offenses that Penn State went up against last season. And I just think it's worth remembering that even if this Penn State team, Matt, you talk so much about how dominant they were, and that was 100% true. But even if this Penn State team allows more than 11.4 points per game, even if they allow, which was 3rd nationally, more than 223.3 yards per game, which was 1st nationally, has fewer than 49 sacks, which was the most nationally. Even if those numbers aren't as good as a function of who the other teams are they are going to be playing against, this is still going to be an outstanding defense. Mm-hmm. It just won't be able to, like, little brother Rutgers or Michigan State or Northwestern or Iowa as easily as it does Wisconsin or West Virginia or, USC especially.
I'm glad you called that out. I think that's a really good point. People, and I probably didn't even think about nearly enough, is that, the defense was great. Yeah. The offense they played were not just bad, they were dumpster fires. So Good
Yeah,
call.
and it lended itself to seeing the very best version of Penn State's defense.
100%.
And we got the very best version of Penn State's defense. We're probably not going to get the very best version of Penn State's defense again this year, but they still should be one of the very best in the country in the face of that. And I'm very interested in that USC game, especially because USC is not as good on offense as it has been. It shouldn't be as good on offense as it has been in recent years. And we've seen that when USC is put on the back foot by an opposing defense, like the Notre Dame game last year, things could get really, really ugly for them. And I'm very interested to see if Penn State can make, or however many games against Utah over the years. And I'm very, very interested to see if Penn State can make what should be an excellent offense look silly by just going out there and being essentially mentality monsters against them.
Well, that's quite a long ways away. So for now, we're just gonna have to wait and see how they perform against what I think is going to be one of their 3 biggest tests of the year in that West Virginia offense. Bill, that's our Penn State defensive preview. Thank you for joining me for it. We're going to end this by shifting gears with a bit of a game. And Bill, with the season starting next week, I've been thinking a lot about, the past of Penn State. And you're a big NBA fan, if I'm not mistaken, Bill. Is that correct?
I would call myself that, yes.
One of my favorite bits every single season in the NBA is that first week of the season.
Are we playing Who He Played For?
The phenomenal TNT segment hosted by Ernie Johnson, unsullied by sponsorship, is Who He Play For. So, Bill, there's a lot of Penn State transfers from even guys who are taking advantage of their 6th season who are still in college football. So, Bill, I have 4 names here. I could do a lot more. We'll see how you do, and I might add a couple to them.
Okay.
But we're going to play Who He Play For, former Penn State player edition. Bill, to start off,
I'm warning our listeners right now. I'm going to be swearing during this.
First off, former linebacker, one of the highest recruited ranked linebackers to ever come to Penn State, out of Michigan, Lance Dixon. Who he play for?
He was at West Virginia, but I believe he transferred to Western Michigan.
That is incorrect, Bill. He now plays for the Toledo Rockets with former
I knew it.
Penn State receiver Jaden Dotton.
Okay, I knew it was somewhere in the MAC, and I couldn't remember where in the Rust Belt it was at. Okay.
Also, out of that 2019 recruiting class, real quick, Bill, on this note, Noah Cain led the Bengals in rushing over the weekend in their preseason game. So shout out to Noah Cain as always. The other running back in that class, Devin Ford, was at Penn State for a while, was on the roster as recently as 2022. Bill, Devin Ford, who he play for?
Did he go to the Ricky Ronnie School of former Penn State football players? Is he at Old Dominion?
He is not at Old Dominion. He spent some time this spring as a safety at Notre Dame, and he has since moved back to running back. So he is still a running back at Notre Dame.
Okay. I thought he went to Notre Dame. I couldn't remember if he went to Notre Dame and then transferred somewhere else or I didn't realize he was still there.
All right, 0 for 2 for Bill. We're going to shift gears a little bit to some more recent players on the Penn State roster. This guy never started a game for Penn State, but at one point had us wondering, is this guy the future of Penn State football? Christian Veillere, who he play for?
He was at Pitt. He just transferred from Pitt.
I'm so happy about this.
Did he?
I'll give you a conference.
I'm going to
guess
a
conference.
Go ahead.
Sunbelt.
Shit, I was going to say Old Dominion.
They're in the Sunbelt.
Louisiana Lafayette.
He is at Georgia State in Atlanta playing for the Panthers.
That. Oh my God, Jesus Christ! I knew that. I have a coworker, Robbie Callan, who has been on the pod for Big Ten over-unders, and he went to Georgia State, so I should have gotten it. Jesus, okay.
Christian Veillere went from Nittany Lion to Pitt Panther to Georgia State Panther. That dude loves cats.
That's right. He stayed with the big cats, yes.
Bill, last one. You're going to have no idea where this guy goes, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah.
Unfairly thrust into the spotlight many moons ago on a cold night in Iowa City. Taquan Roberson is still in college football. Bill, Taquan Roberson, who he play for?
He obviously was at UConn, but he has since I know he has since left UConn.
I'll give you a hint. He is on a roster that features another Penn State transfer.
On a roster that features another Penn State transfer. Okay. Oh, damn it, it wouldn't play. I just pulled up the clip of Shaquille O'Neal saying Guangdong Tigers.
That's the best clip
and then screaming Ni Hao over and over. Hold on. I think let me try that one more time. We're doing this for the bit, folks.
This is great audio content. Thank you for listening.
This is great audio content that Matt thrust onto me.
Guangdong Tigers. Ni hao. Ni hao. Ni hao.
So that is my formal guess, Guangdong Tigers.
Bill, he is in the Big 12 on the Kansas State Wildcats roster right now with Dante
Get the hell out of here.
I was stunned by this development as well.
Good for him.
Right? Good for him.
Is he still playing quarterback? Or did they,
he is listed as a quarterback on the roster, yeah.
Good for him. Kansas State has their starting quarterback is a guy named Avery Johnson, who's a really good football player. So good for Taquan that he was able to get a job there. I wonder if him and Dante Cephas just sit there, over lunch and complain about Penn State football and complain about James Franklin. And then Dylan Edwards comes in and says, boy, if you want to know what it's like playing for a bad football program, let me tell you something about the Colorado Buffaloes.
Bill, you went 0 for 4. I have a couple others.
I did go
if you want. I can
sure go for it.
There's some folks who now play for FCS schools. If you want those in there,
sure.
Do you remember, Bill?
I can't get any worse.
Signed as a wide receiver, a fairly highly rated one, way back in the day, John Dunmore. John Dunmore, who he played for.
Did he go to FIU for a second or something?
He went to Oregon State for a minute.
Oregon State, that's right. No, where is he?
He is at Towson University in the CAA.
Okay.
Bill,
nice.
Jamari Budden, at one point in time, a 4-star prospect, thrust into almost burning red shirt as a true freshman for Penn State. Bill, Jamari Budden, who he played for.
Didn't he go to New Mexico or New Mexico State?
He was at New Mexico State, but he is no longer there.
Okay. I will guess he is also at Towson.
He is at Grand Valley State, back home in Michigan.
Okay.
Bill, I'll give you a recent one. This year he transferred. Malik Mega, who he played for. I know you won't know this.
Yeah, Quinnipiac.
It is not Quinnipiac. He is at Coastal Carolina. So the Canadian gets to go to Myrtle Beach.
I did know that one. Damn it. Okay.
All right. Should we call it there, Bill, or do you want one more?
Give me one. At this point, how much worse can it get?
That is true. Punter. Allegedly family member. Alex Bacchetta, who he played for.
Rice.
There we go, Bill. You end strong by getting the punter transferring to Conference USA on the money. Bill, thank you for joining me in who he played for.
Listen, if there's one thing I know, it is where my cousin Alex Bacchetta plays his college football. So I more than any of the other outstanding young men you just mentioned, I am rooting for Alex to do great things. Yeah, I've told the story in the pod before, but when he first committed to Penn State, through a family member, through one of his family members, they found out there was someone in the Penn State universe, the last name DeFilippo, and he has some relatives with the last name DeFilippo. So I always root for cousin Alex to succeed and thrive and do some really great things on and off the football field at Rice University.
So if you played along, let us know your score. You can tweet it at RLR or just tweet it at PSU Matt 2005 and let Matt know how you did. Because he won't know we played this until the episode comes out.
Please don't. I only do that if you did worse than me, because otherwise I will be humbled.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for joining me in that game. Thank you for joining me for the defensive preview. I'm very excited to see this unit play in 12 days. Again, it's wild that it's back next week. Bill, do you have your first game plan set yet?
I do not. I'm actually, after we're done here, I've mentioned this before, my brother-in-law is a big WVU fan. So after this, I'm going to go see my sister's family, and my brother-in-law and I are going to I'm going to sit down and basically say, like, we need to figure out if we're going to this football game. If
Hmm.
not, I will probably do what I have done for each of the last 2 Penn State openers, and I will purchase 12 bottles of Rolling Rock and drink them alone and see how many I can get through by the time the game ends.
Amazing. We'll be back in your feed next week with, I believe, I'll commit to it now, 2 episodes. We're doing our annual preseason over-under picks. I just finalized them with friend of the show, Stanley. Maybe we'll drop that yet this week. So if we're in your feed again this week, be on the lookout for that. If not, we'll drop it next week. And then with our West Virginia preview. So we're very excited to get the season rolling. As always, be sure to follow along on your podcast platform of choice. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We're on Twitter over at RLR Blog. If we're on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Jump in the comments, talk about the Penn State defense with Penn State fans. We always have a really great community start to form around this time of the year. Last year, Bill, we had a lot of comments on our West Virginia preview from some rival fans who were very nice to us, which I'm very excited to see if that returns this year. So, as always, thank you for following along. And for my co-host, Bill DeFilippo, I'm Matt Flipovitz. We'll see you next week.